My brother tightened his grip on my arm, practically dragging me across the marble floor of the luxury ballroom. He shoved me in front of his fiancee's billionaire father, his face twisted into a cruel smirk. He announced to the entire table of elites that I was the family failure, a mentally ill burden they usually kept locked away. My parents stood right behind him, nodding eagerly and apologizing for my pathetic, uninvited intrusion. The billionaire slowly stood up, brushing off his tuxedo. He did not call for security. He did not look at me with disgust. Instead, his eyes locked onto mine with absolute respect, and he spoke the last words my family ever expected to hear. So it is you. This is completely unexpected. If you have ever been treated like the black sheep by people who are secretly feeding off your hard work, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you absolutely love watching toxic people step blindly into their own traps. My name is Valerie, and I am 33 years old. Exactly 1 week before that spectacular collision in the ballroom, I sat in the stuffy, overly decorated living room of my parents' house in a wealthy suburb of Chicago. The air was thick with the scent of my mother's expensive but outdated perfume, a smell that always signaled impending demands. I had been summoned there under the guise of a family emergency. Instead, I found my older brother Jason, who was 35, and constantly radiating unearned confidence, pacing back and forth across the Persian rug. He looked like a man preparing to deliver a corporate keynote, adjusting the cuffs of a tailored suit he definitely could not afford. My parents, Patricia and Richard, sat on the plush velvet sofa, watching him with the kind of blind adoration they reserved exclusively for their only son. Jason stopped pacing and tossed a thick stack of legal documents onto the glass coffee table right in front of me. The loud smack of the paper hitting the glass was meant to be intimidating. "Sign it," Jason demanded. He leaned over the table, trying to use his physical presence to force my compliance. "The wedding is in exactly 7 days, Valerie. Do not make this difficult for everyone." I did not flinch. I slowly reached out and picked up the document, scanning the first page. It was a mortgage agreement. Not just any agreement, but a legal transfer of deed that would allow Jason to take out a massive loan against my apartment. He wanted $150,000. I looked up at him, my face completely blank, keeping my breathing perfectly even. "You want me to leverage my home to pay for your wedding?" I stated. It was not a question, just a flat observation of his sheer audacity. "It is not just a wedding," Jason snapped, rolling his eyes as if I were a slow child. "It is a merger. I am marrying Vanessa Sterling. The Sterlings are an elite African-American dynasty. Her father, Marcus Sterling, built a global logistics empire from the ground up. Do you have any idea what kind of money and power that family holds? I cannot show up to my own wedding looking like a peasant. I need that money to cover my share of the extravagant venue and the luxury yacht party this weekend." My mother, Patricia, stepped forward, her heels clicking sharply against the hardwood floor. She looked at me with the same expression of mild distaste she had worn since I was a teenager. "Listen to your brother, Valerie. He is finally securing our family's future in high society. You are just sitting around doing some low-level accounting work for whatever boring company you are at now. You owe us this. We raised you. It is time you paid us back and proved you are actually useful for once in your life." I placed the document back on the table and aligned the edges perfectly, making sure they were parallel with the glass. "I am not a low-level accountant, Mom. I am a forensic financial auditor. And no, Jason, I will not be signing over my property so you can pretend to be a millionaire to impress your fiance's family." Jason's face turned a violent shade of red. He slammed his hands down on the table, leaning directly into my space, his breath smelling of stale coffee and desperation. "You selfish, miserable loser," he hissed. "You are just jealous. You are jealous that Vanessa is gorgeous, wealthy, and comes from a highly respected family while you are going to die alone in that cramped apartment crunching numbers for pennies." I watched the vein throb in his neck, completely unbothered by his tantrum. Jason had always used volume to compensate for his lack of substance. He was a master at playing the successful entrepreneur driving leased sports cars and dropping buzzwords he barely understood, all while our parents quietly paid his credit card minimums. They had drained their own retirement accounts to fund his facade, and now they expected me to sacrifice my only asset to keep his lies afloat. My father Richard, who had been silently watching the exchange from his leather armchair, finally spoke up. His voice was cold and entirely void of parental affection. Your mother is right, Valerie. Jason is bringing prestige to the family name. The Sterlings expect a certain caliber of in-laws. Your brother cannot afford to look weak in front of Marcus Sterling. $150,000 is a small price to pay to ensure he secures his position in that family. You have no husband, no children, and no real prospects. The least you can do is support the child who is actually making something of himself. I looked at the three of them, Jason panting with manufactured rage, Patricia crossing her arms in a dramatic display of victimhood, Richard puffing his chest out in false authority. They truly believed I was a disposable resource, a silent bank account meant to fund their golden boy's delusions. They thought my refusal was just a temporary stubbornness they could bully out of me. They did not realize that I had spent the last decade building a backbone of steel in the cutthroat world of corporate crisis management. You are asking me to render myself homeless so you can buy ice sculptures and rent a yacht? I said, my voice dangerously calm. The answer is no. And if Marcus Sterling is the brilliant businessman you claim he is, he will see right through this pathetic charade soon enough. The silence that followed my words was so absolute, I could hear the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Jason stared at me, his mouth slightly open, completely incapable of processing the fact that his favorite punching bag had just insulted his idol and his grand plan in one breath. But my mother did not freeze. She moved. Before I could even blink, Patricia lunged across the short distance separating us. Her hand swung through the air with a vicious, practiced arc, delivering a stinging slap across my left cheek. The sharp crack echoed loudly against the high ceilings of the living room. The force of the impact snapped my head to the side, my hair falling over my face. The heavy diamond rings on her fingers scratched against my jawline, leaving a trail of burning heat in their wake. I did not raise my hand to touch my face. I did not gasp. I simply turned my head back, my breathing perfectly even, and looked directly into her eyes. My lack of reaction seemed to infuriate her even more. She stood there, her chest heaving, her perfectly manicured hands trembling with manufactured righteous indignation. You miserable, spiteful creature, my mother shrieked, her voice echoing off the walls. How dare you speak about Jason that way? How dare you disrespect the Sterling name in my house? You are nothing but a jealous, useless burden. You have always been a burden. You sit in your pathetic little apartment doing your pathetic little numbers, seething with envy because your brother is actually making something of himself. He is marrying into an elite African-American dynasty, a family of true prestige and unimaginable wealth, and you are trying to tear him down because you know you will never amount to anything close to Vanessa Sterling. You have spent your entire life being average, trying to drag everyone else down to your mediocre level just to feel better about yourself. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. You think you are so smart with your rigid little rules and your refusal to help your own blood. You are trying to ruin his integration into their world. You want him to fail so you will not look like the massive disappointment you actually are. We gave you everything, Valerie. We clothed you, we fed you, we tolerated your lack of ambition, and this is how you repay us. By actively trying to destroy your brother's future just to satisfy your own bitter ego. Jason nodded vigorously behind her, emboldened by his mother's attack. She is right, he sneered, pointing a finger at me. You are a toxic influence, Valerie. You have always tried to drag me down to your level. Vanessa warned me that people like you would try to sabotage our happiness. I just never thought my own sister would be the one trying to derail my success. I looked at Jason, then at Patricia. The sheer scale of their delusion was almost fascinating to witness. They were so deeply entrenched in their own lies that they actually believed them. They believed Jason was a successful entrepreneur on the verge of joining high society rather than a broke fraud begging his younger sister for a handout. My father stepped forward deliberately, placing himself between me and the front door, towering over me with an expression of absolute disgust. Richard had always been a man who measured love in dollars and status, and right now my refusal to provide either made me entirely worthless in his eyes. "That is enough," Richard commanded, his voice booming with the artificial authority he loved to project. "Valerie, you have made your position perfectly clear. You have no loyalty to this family. You have no respect for the sacrifices we have made to raise you. If you are going to stand there and stubbornly refuse to support your brother's monumental achievement, then you leave us no choice." He straightened his tie, looking at me with cold, dead eyes. "You are no longer my daughter. I am officially disowning you right here and now. I will not have a spiteful, parasitic failure dragging down the family name just as we are entering the upper echelons of society. You are not to contact me, your mother, or your brother ever again." He pointed toward the heavy oak front door. "Get out of my house. And listen to me very carefully. You are absolutely forbidden from showing your face at the wedding. You are banned from the yacht party, the rehearsal dinner, and the ceremony itself. If you even try to come near the Sterling family, I will personally have security throw you out into the street. We will tell Marcus and Vanessa that you are dealing with severe mental health issues and had to be institutionalized. Do you understand me? You do not exist to us anymore." The air in the room felt heavy, suffocating with the weight of their combined hostility. Any normal person would have broken down. Any normal daughter would have cried, pleaded, or shouted back in a desperate attempt to defend her character. But I was not a normal daughter anymore. The emotional abuse that used to crush me when I was younger now just felt like background noise. For 33 years, I had bent over backwards trying to earn a single word of validation from these people. I had paid my own way through college, built my own business from the ground up, and never asked them for a single dime. Yet in their eyes, I was the enemy simply because I refused to be their sacrificial lamb. The stinging sensation on my cheek was nothing compared to the absolute clarity settling over my mind. I slowly reached up and brushed a stray lock of hair behind my ear. I looked at my mother's flushed, angry face. I looked at Jason's smug, entitled grin. I looked at my father's rigid, unforgiving posture. I did not shed a single tear. My expression remained completely unreadable, an impenetrable mask of professional composure that I used when dismantling corporate frauds. I picked up my leather handbag from the sofa, moving with deliberate, unhurried grace. I did not slam any doors. I did not hurl any insults back at them. I simply walked toward the entryway, my heels clicking methodically against the polished hardwood floors. When I reached the front door, I paused, resting my hand on the brass handle. I did not turn around. I did not need to see their faces to know they thought they had won. They truly believed they had just successfully discarded the weak link of their precious family, permanently cutting me out of their future wealth and high society connections. They were probably already planning how to spin my absence to the Sterlings, crafting the perfect sob story about their troubled, estranged daughter. They had no idea they had just handed me the ultimate freedom to destroy them without an ounce of guilt. I opened the door and walked out into the cool evening air, leaving them trapped in their fragile house of cards, blissfully unaware of the hurricane that was about to hit. 45 minutes after walking out of that suffocating suburban house, my private driver pulled up to a gleaming glass skyscraper in the heart of the Chicago financial district. I stepped out of the sleek town car and walked through the soaring marble lobby of the building, my heels echoing with a rhythm of absolute authority. The security guards nodded respectfully as I bypassed the main reception desk and approached the private elevator bank, reserved exclusively for the top-floor executives. I swiped my biometric keycard, and the brushed steel doors slid shut, carrying me smoothly upward away from the pathetic delusions of my biological family and into the empire I had built with my own two hands. When the elevator chimed and opened on the 40th floor, the atmosphere immediately shifted. The air up here was crisp, charged with the quiet, intense hum of serious money and relentless focus. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a breathtaking panoramic view of the entire city skyline, the glittering lights stretching out endlessly toward the dark expanse of Lake Michigan. Sleek digital displays line the pristine white walls, tracking global market fluctuations and corporate data streams in real time. Analysts in immaculate suits moved purposefully between glass-walled conference rooms, dissecting ledgers and tearing apart offshore shell companies. I walked past the rows of high-tech workstations and approached the frosted glass doors at the end of the main corridor. The bold silver lettering etched into the glass gleamed under the recessed lighting. Valerie, Chief Executive Officer, Vanguard Financial Forensics. My family genuinely believed I spent my days rotting in a cramped cubicle pushing pencils and fetching coffee for middle management. They thought I was a pathetic low-level clerk, desperate for their approval. The reality was that I commanded the most ruthless and elite crisis management and financial investigation firm in the country. I was the person Fortune 500 companies, international hedge funds, and desperate billionaires called when massive sums of money went missing. My firm specialized in corporate rescue operations, hostile asset recovery, and hunting down the most sophisticated con artists in the financial world. I did not just crunch numbers, I weaponized them. I cleaned up catastrophic corporate messes, and I destroyed financial predators for a living. I pushed open the door to my sprawling corner office and tossed my leather handbag onto the expansive mahogany desk. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling window looking out over the city below, letting the cool, quiet power of the room wash away the lingering stench of my mother's perfume and my father's hollow threats. They had disowned me to protect their precious social climbing son. It was almost poetic. A sharp knock on the open door pulled me from my thoughts. My executive assistant, David, hurried into the room holding a thick, securely sealed red folder. He looked unusually tense, his professional demeanor tight with urgency. "Good evening, Valerie," David said, stepping up to my desk and placing the heavy folder directly in the center of my blotter. "I know you asked not to be disturbed after hours today, but we just received a highly classified, expedited request from a top-tier prospective client. The retainer was wired 10 minutes ago, paid in full, and it is astronomical. The client insists on absolute discretion and demands that you personally oversee the preliminary risk assessment." I turned away from the window and walked back to my desk, my interest instantly piqued. My firm routinely handled high-profile clients, but an expedited red folder case meant someone incredibly powerful was dealing with a sudden, potentially devastating vulnerability. "Who is the client?" I asked, reaching for the silver letter opener to break the tamper-proof seal on the folder. "The client is operating through a blind proxy shell company for privacy," David replied, handing me the encrypted intake summary. "But the internal markers match the financial footprint of Marcus Sterling, the logistics billionaire. He is requesting a deep dive forensic background check on a man who recently proposed to his daughter. Sterling suspects the prospective groom is hiding a massive financial liability and attempting to orchestrate a long con, but he needs undeniable, legally binding proof before he steps in and shuts down the wedding. He wants us to tear this man's financial history apart and expose any buried secrets." I froze. My hand gripped the letter opener so tightly my knuckles turned white. The name hit me like a freight train, sending a shockwave of electric realization straight down my spine. Marcus Sterling. The same Marcus Sterling whose daughter my brother was desperately trying to marry. I slowly slid the letter opener under the red wax seal and sliced it open. I flipped the heavy cardstock cover back. Staring back at me from the first page of the intake dossier printed in high-resolution color was a photograph of my brother Jason. He was wearing the same tailored suit he had on earlier this evening, flashing his signature arrogant, entitled grin at the camera. Below his photograph was a summary of the credentials he had apparently presented to the Sterling family to prove he was a wealthy, successful entrepreneur, worthy of marrying their daughter. I let out a low, dark laugh. The sound echoed strangely in the massive office, devoid of humor, but dripping with a lethal, terrifying satisfaction. The irony of the universe was so potent, I could almost taste it on my tongue. My family had just physically assaulted me and thrown me out of their house to protect Jason's grand illusion. They had demanded I sacrifice my only home to fund his fraudulent lifestyle. And now the very billionaire they were bending over backwards to impress had just hired my firm to investigate their golden boy. David looked at me, clearly unsettled by my reaction. Valerie, is everything all right? Do you recognize the target? I traced the edge of Jason's photograph with my index finger, a predatory calm settling over my entire body. I do not just recognize him, David, I said, my voice dropping to a deadly whisper. I know exactly how fake his watch is, how much debt is sitting on his maxed-out credit cards, and exactly how desperate he is to drain the Sterling family trust fund. I closed the folder and looked up at my assistant, the pieces of a flawless, devastating plan already snapping into place in my mind. Call the entire senior investigation team back to the office immediately. I do not care what time it is. Cancel all my meetings for the rest of the week. We are taking this case, and we are going to tear this man's life apart, digit by digit. My family thought they could discard me like trash. They thought they had secured their glamorous future in high society. They had no idea they had just handed the executioner the axe. By midnight, the primary conference room of Vanguard Financial Forensics had been transformed into a digital war room. 6 of my top investigators sat around the massive glass table, their faces illuminated by the glow of multiple monitors. The screens projected a tangled web of bank records, wire transfers, and credit reports. I stood at the head of the table sipping black coffee, watching as my team systematically dismantled the illusion my brother had spent years constructing. It started exactly as I expected. Jason had absolutely zero legitimate assets. His luxury downtown loft was leased under my parents' names, and they were currently 3 months behind on the rent. His sports car, the one he constantly flaunted on social media, was heavily financed with a predatory interest rate that was slowly bleeding him dry. Every single credit card attached to his social security number was maxed out to the absolute limit. He had been surviving by taking out high-interest personal loans, using the new money to pay the minimum balances on the old debts, creating a desperate, collapsing Ponzi scheme of his own finances. But as we dug deeper, bypassing the standard credit checks and penetrating the encrypted layers of his offshore transactions, the picture turned from pathetic to highly dangerous. "Valerie, you need to see this ledger, Marcus," my lead cyber investigator called out from his terminal. He projected a hidden financial network onto the main presentation screen. I traced the routing numbers through a series of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. Jason is not just dealing with credit card debt. He has been funneling massive amounts of money into an illegal underground sports betting syndicate. I stepped closer to the screen, my eyes narrowing as I calculated the staggering deficits. "How much is he in the hole for?" I asked, my voice deadly quiet. Marcus ran the final algorithm. $2 million. And these creditors are not banks, Valerie. They are violent people. According to the intercepted communication logs, they gave him an ultimatum last week. He either pays them back in full by the end of the month, or they start breaking legs. A cold realization washed over me. The wedding. Jason was not marrying Vanessa Sterling out of love or even a general desire for high society status. He was marrying her because he was terrified. He was backed into a lethal corner, and he planned to use Vanessa as a human shield. Once they were legally bound, he intended to drain her massive trust fund to pay off his illegal gambling debts, leaving her financially ruined and legally entangled with dangerous criminals. My parents were not just funding a wedding. They were financing a hostage situation without even knowing the true stakes. The sheer depravity of his scheme was astounding, but the most infuriating revelation was yet to come. David walked back into the war room holding the physical portfolio Jason had submitted to Marcus Sterling. He looked disgusted as he handed it to me. "It gets worse, Valerie," he said. "Mr. Sterling requested we verify the specific corporate successes your brother claimed in this document. I ran the text through our plagiarism software. You are going to want to kill him." I opened the glossy, professionally bound portfolio. Jason had presented himself to the Sterling family as the brilliant CEO of a boutique risk management firm. As I flipped through the pages, my blood pressure spiked. He had not just exaggerated his resume, he had committed blatant, undeniable corporate espionage. The case studies detailed in his portfolio were mine. He had stolen the exact crisis management reports from Vanguard Financial Forensics. The $50 million supply chain rescue operation we executed for a European shipping conglomerate was listed on page 4. The hostile asset recovery we orchestrated for a tech giant in Silicon Valley was featured prominently on page 7. He had literally copied my proprietary corporate data, erased my name, and typed his own in its place. He was using the very blood, sweat, and tears I had sacrificed my 20s to build using my genius as his golden ticket into the Sterling Empire. He had called me a low-level accountant. He had slapped me and thrown me out of his house for being a useless burden, all while he was actively stealing my identity to save his own pathetic life. A slow, icy smile spread across my face. It was not a smile of amusement. It was the smile of a predator that had just locked the cage from the inside. David watched me carefully. "Do you want me to draft the exposure report for Mr. Sterling tonight?" he asked. "We have more than enough evidence to send him to federal prison for wire fraud and corporate theft. We can shut this wedding down with one simple, undeniable email." I closed the stolen portfolio and tossed it onto the glass table. "No," I said, my voice echoing with absolute authority in the quiet room. "An email is entirely too merciful for what Jason is trying to do. I do not want him to just face legal consequences. I want him to feel the exact same humiliation he tried to inflict on me. I want to see the panic in his eyes when his entire fake world collapses in front of the people he is trying to con." I turned to face the floor-to-ceiling windows looking out over the dark, sprawling city below. "The Sterlings are hosting an exclusive invitation-only luxury yacht party this weekend to celebrate the upcoming nuptials," I continued. "Marcus Sterling extended an open proxy invitation to our firm so our lead investigator could conduct field surveillance. I am going to take that invitation myself." David widened his eyes in surprise. "You are going to attend the yacht party undercover?" "Exactly," I replied, smoothing the lapels of my tailored blazer. "My parents expressly forbade me from showing my face anywhere near high society. They are terrified I will ruin their perfect image. So I am going to give them exactly what they fear. I am going to walk onto that yacht completely uninvited by them, and I am going to watch my brother sweat. Prepare the audio recording devices, David. We are going to let them dig their graves a little deeper before we bury them completely." The air off Lake Michigan was cool and crisp 3 days later as I approached the private marina. The Sterlings had chartered the largest luxury yacht in the harbor for the upcoming celebration. It was a massive multi-deck vessel glowing with warm ambient light against the dark water. Elite guests milled about the upper decks holding crystal flutes of vintage champagne, their laughter drifting over the gentle sound of waves slapping against the polished hull. The security perimeter at the dock was tighter than a Federal Reserve Bank. Burly men in dark suits cross-referenced every single name on an encrypted tablet before allowing anyone to step onto the boarding ramp. I walked up the illuminated pathway. I was not wearing the cheap department store clearance rack clothes my family assumed I lived in. I wore a deceptively simple custom-tailored emerald silk dress. It had no flashy logos, no ostentatious sequins, and no desperate cries for attention. It was the absolute epitome of quiet luxury, a garment that screamed power and immense wealth only to those who actually knew what they were looking at. I handed my digital invitation to the head of security. He scanned the barcode with a skeptical eye. The screen blinked green instantly, with a supreme clearance code arranged directly by Marcus Sterling's executive office. The guard's demeanor changed in a fraction of a second. He stepped aside respectfully, ushering me aboard with a polite nod. I was not on the guest list as Jason's sister. I was an anonymous VIP associate of the billionaire host. I stepped onto the main deck, allowing the soft jazz playing from a live band to wash over me. The opulence was staggering. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated with silver trays of caviar and imported truffles. The guests were titans of industry, influential African American business leaders, tech innovators, and political heavyweights. And then standing out like massive sore thumbs was my biological family. I spotted Jason first. He was standing near the starboard railing wearing a rented tuxedo that was trying far too hard to look bespoke. He was laughing too loudly at a joke made by one of Marcus Sterling's logistics partners. He was holding a glass of expensive scotch he clearly did not know how to drink, aggressively playing the role of the successful prodigy. A few yards away from him stood my parents. Patricia and Richard were working the crowd with a desperation that was almost painful to watch. They were grinning so hard their faces looked permanently stretched. My mother kept adjusting her overly beaded flashy gown, trying desperately to match the effortless elegance of the women around her but failing miserably. My father was nodding eagerly at everything anyone said, acting like a subservient court jester rather than an equal. They were completely intoxicated by the wealth surrounding them, utterly blind to the fact that they were nothing more than a temporary amusement to the people they were trying so desperately to impress. I stood near a towering arrangement of white orchids nursing a glass of sparkling water. I reached into my clutch and activated the hidden audio recording device my team had prepared. The red light blinked once, confirming it was capturing every sound. I took a slow sip of water and waited. It took exactly 4 minutes for their perfect illusion to shatter. My mother turned to signal a waiter, and her eyes swept casually across the floral arrangements. Her gaze slid past me, then snapped back with whiplash speed. I watched the blood drain from Patricia's face in real time. Her practiced high society smile vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. She blinked rapidly, shaking her head slightly as if trying to clear a terrible hallucination. But I did not disappear. I simply raised my glass to her in a silent, mocking toast. Panic visibly seized her entire body. She grabbed my father's arm so hard he spilled his champagne down the front of his tuxedo shirt. He glared at her, annoyed by the interruption, but she aggressively jerked her head in my direction. When Richard finally saw me standing there, looking perfectly at ease among the billionaires, he was sweating to impress, his jaw practically unhinged. They completely abandoned the conversation they were having with a prominent judge. I could see the frantic gears turning in their heads. Their disowned peasant daughter had somehow infiltrated the most exclusive high-security event of their entire lives. In their narrow minds, I was an unstable, jealous bomb about to detonate and destroy Jason's golden ticket. They believed I was there to beg for money or make a massive, humiliating public scene. They knew they had to neutralize me before Marcus Sterling or Vanessa noticed my presence. Patricia and Richard began power walking across the teak deck. Their movements were fueled by pure panic and a desperate need to maintain control. They weaved through the elite crowd with frantic, jerky movements, bumping into waiters and excusing themselves with strained, breathless apologies. They looked like two drowning people desperately trying to reach a life raft. I did not run. I did not hide. I simply stood my ground and let them come to me. They descended upon me like terrified vultures. Before I could even say good evening, my father's hand clamped down on my upper arm with a bruising, desperate force. His fingers dug into my skin as he forcefully pulled me away from the open deck. My mother flanked my other side, using her body to block me from the view of the other guests. They did not say a single word to me. Their absolute terror was palpable, radiating from them in waves as they dragged me out of sight. They just aggressively marched me toward a secluded, dimly lit hallway near the yacht's interior dining room, desperate to keep my existence hidden from the massive financial empire they were trying to steal. They thought they were silencing me. The trap was set perfectly, and my toxic family had just walked right into it without hesitation. Richard shoved me into the corridor, pinning me against a mahogany wall. The jazz music faded beneath my parents' panicked breathing. Patricia stood close, foundation settling into her angry facial lines. "Are you completely insane?" My mother hissed, her voice a toxic whisper. "How did you bypass dock security? Did you bribe a caterer? You are going to ruin everything." I pulled my arm from his grip and smoothed my silk dress without spilling my sparkling water. I took a slow sip, letting the silence stretch to make their skin crawl. I walked up the main ramp, I replied serenely. Just like every other invited guest? Do not lie, Richard spat. You are not on the guest list. Jason made sure of that. We know exactly why you are here, Valerie. You are broke, desperate, and sneaked aboard to beg the Sterlings for a handout. You wanted a free meal while trying to extort your brother. I smiled, a chilling curve of my lips. Beg for food, I repeated. Dad, if I wanted a free meal, I would have ordered room service. I would not subject myself to your cologne just for caviar. Patricia jabbed her finger at me. Listen to me, you ungrateful parasite. You will turn around, walk down the back staircase, and leave this yacht right now. If you take one step toward the main deck, I will scream for security. I will tell them a stalker sneaked on board. I will have you arrested for trespassing and ensure you spend the entire wedding weekend sitting in a holding cell. Her desperation was almost pathetic. They had no idea they were threatening the CEO of Vanguard Financial Forensics with a trespassing charge at a party where I held higher security clearance than the groom himself. Go ahead, I challenged smoothly. Call security, Mom. Yell as loud as you want. But before you make a massive scene and draw Marcus Sterling's attention to this hallway, let us use some logic. I took another sip of my water, locking eyes with my father. You saw the security perimeter outside. You saw the biometric scanners and encrypted tablets. Do you honestly believe a broke accountant could sneak past a billionaire's private security detail? Do you really think they let people onto this yacht without verifying their exact clearance level? Richard hesitated. His eyes darted toward the hallway entrance, a flicker of doubt finally breaking his arrogant facade. He knew I was right. The Sterling security team was flawless. There was absolutely no physical way a random trespasser could stand on this deck. Patricia refused to apply logic to her blind panic. I do not care how you scammed your way on board, she growled. You are a toxic plague on this family. Jason is out there right now talking to Marcus's top executives, securing his position as the CEO of his risk management firm. He is building an empire. You are not going to ruin his reputation with your pathetic jealousy. Her words were perfect ammunition. I leaned back against the mahogany wall, adopting a stance of complete relaxation. Jason is building an empire, I echoed softly. Tell me, Mom, what is the name of this highly successful risk management firm he supposedly runs? What are his profit margins? Can you name a single client he has actually served? She faltered, her jaw snapping shut. She did not know. Jason had fed them vague buzzwords and they had swallowed his lies whole because it fit the narrative they desperately wanted to believe. He deals with highly confidential corporate accounts, Richard interjected, puffing his chest out. It is above your pay grade, Valerie. You would not understand the complexities of international finance. The urge to laugh was overwhelming, but I kept my face entirely impassive. You are right, I said smoothly. I am sure Jason's grasp of finance is absolutely staggering. In fact, I am so fascinated by his business acumen that I think I will go ask him a few professional questions myself. I took a step toward the hallway exit. Richard blocked my path, his face turning a dangerous shade of crimson. You are not going anywhere near him, he ordered. You are leaving this yacht immediately, or I will throw you overboard myself. I looked at him, dropping the polite facade. My gaze turned so cold and predatory that Richard took a half step backward. Do not ever threaten to put your hands on me again, I said, my voice dropping to a lethal whisper. You disowned me, remember? I am not your daughter anymore. I am a private citizen attending a private event. You have absolutely zero authority over me, and you have zero leverage. Patricia looked ready to hyperventilate. Her eyes darted frantically between me and the main deck. Please, Valerie, she begged, her tone shifting from aggressive to a desperate whine. I will give you money. I will write you a check right now. Just leave. Do not do this to your brother. Do not ruin his life. I watched her humiliate herself to protect a fraud. You already tried to take my home to fund his lies, I reminded her coldly. Your money means absolutely nothing to me. And as for ruining his life, I am not doing a thing. I am just a guest enjoying a lovely evening on the water. I stepped around my father, who was far too paralyzed by my sudden shift in demeanor to stop me. I am going back to the party right now, I announced over my shoulder. Feel free to call security if you want to test your luck tonight. But I promise you, if you make a scene tonight, Marcus Sterling will know exactly who the real fraud is before the appetizers are served. I walked back down the hallway, leaving them frozen in the shadows, choking on their own escalating anxiety. The game was in full swing, and I was holding every winning card. I stepped out of the narrow corridor and breathed in the cool lake breeze. The string quartet was playing, the champagne was flowing, and Jason was completely unaware that his reckoning had arrived. I adjusted the recording device hidden inside my clutch, ensuring the green light was active. I had just captured my parents admitting they were willing to bribe me to protect his fake empire. It was glorious. I spotted my brother standing near the stern, exactly where I had left him. It was time to introduce the risk management CEO to a crisis he could not control. I glided across the polished teak deck, the breeze catching the hem of my silk dress. The yacht was a floating palace, where billionaires and industry titans mingled over clinking crystal. Illuminated by the soft glow of the deck lights, Jason was holding court. He stood in the center of a small circle of older, distinguished men. One was a major logistics supplier for the Sterlings, the other a prominent venture capitalist. Jason wore his rented tuxedo like a costume, gesturing grandly while holding his scotch. I slipped to the edge of their circle, close enough to hear, but outside his direct line of sight. He leaned in, dropping his voice to that conspiratorial tone businessmen use when sharing exclusive insights. "It was a complete disaster when we took over the account," Jason said, shaking his head with manufactured gravity. "A European shipping conglomerate hemorrhaging $50 million due to supply chain inefficiencies and hostile internal actors. They called my firm at the 11th hour. We had to restructure their entire offshore portfolio overnight just to stop the bleeding." My blood ran cold, followed by a surge of pure adrenaline. He was not just stealing my company's general reputation. He was giving a word-for-word recitation of the executive summary I had personally written for Vanguard's most highly classified rescue operation. I had worked 80-hour weeks negotiating with European regulators to save that conglomerate. Now my brother was using my sleepless nights as a cocktail party anecdote to impress his future father-in-law's partners. I stepped into the circle, positioning myself directly across from Jason. My tailored dress and calm demeanor signaled that I belonged, and these men instinctively made space for me. Jason was mid-sentence when his eyes finally landed on me. His jaw clamped shut so fast his teeth clicked. The color drained completely from his face, leaving his skin an ashen gray under the deck lights. The hand holding his scotch began to tremble, causing the amber liquid to slosh dangerously close to the rim. He stared at me with terrified eyes, paralyzed by the sudden appearance of the actual architect of his stolen story. "That sounds like a fascinating restructuring operation, Jason," I said, my voice smooth and ringing with professional authority. The older men murmured their agreement, turning their attention between the two of us. "When you navigated the European regulatory hurdles during that $50 million rescue, how did you handle the liquidity ratio deficits across their subsidiary shell companies?" His Adam's apple bobbed in his throat. He opened his mouth, but nothing came out. I leaned in, keeping my tone deceptively polite and intellectually curious. "Restructuring an offshore portfolio of that magnitude while simultaneously bleeding capital requires a highly specific forensic intervention. Did your team utilize a debt-to-equity swap under European Union insolvency directives, or did you circumvent taxation protocols by leveraging the parent company's deferred revenue assets? I would love to hear your strategic approach to mitigating the corporate tax liability in that specific regulatory environment." The silence that fell over the small circle was deafening. The logistics supplier and venture capitalist leaned forward, clearly intrigued by the high-level financial jargon. They looked at Jason, expecting a brilliant technical response from the supposed CEO of an elite firm. Jason was sweating. Actual beads of perspiration formed on his forehead, catching the deck lighting. He looked like a deer caught in the headlights of an oncoming freight train. He shifted his weight, tugging at the collar of his tuxedo shirt as if it were suddenly choking him. Well, you see, Jason stammered, his voice cracking. European markets are very complex. We had a team. A large team of specialists handled the day-to-day numbers. As the CEO, I oversee the broader vision. The big picture strategy, really. The venture capitalist frowned, his expression shifting from admiration to skepticism. But surely you engineered the financial bypass for the deferred revenue. He pressed, clearly unimpressed by Jason's vague answer. That is the cornerstone of any operation of that scale. Jason looked frantically around the deck, his eyes darting like a trapped animal. Yes, of course, he mumbled, wiping a hand across his damp forehead. We bypassed it. We used standard protocols, very rigorous protocols to ensure maximum profitability for the client. It was all highly confidential, naturally. Client privilege prevents me from getting into the weeds on the accounting side. It was the laugh a senior executive gives when an intern says something profoundly stupid. Standard protocols for a $50 million offshore deficit. That is an unconventional approach to high-stakes forensic accounting. Do you not agree, gentlemen? I have never heard of standard protocols saving a sinking European conglomerate, he remarked. Perhaps your firm's methodology is just too abstract for us traditional investors. Jason was completely drowning. The facade he had spent months building was disintegrating in less than 2 minutes. The wealthy partners looked at him not as a peer, but as a fraud who had wandered into their elite circle. He glared at me, eyes burning with a mixture of panic and murderous rage. He realized I was not there to scream or throw a drink. I was there to professionally dismantle his reputation in front of the exact people he needed. Excuse me, Jason gasped, his voice tight with desperation. I need to handle a security matter. He practically shoved his way past the venture capitalist, fleeing the circle of men. He scrambled toward the nearest staircase, scanning the deck wildly, until he spotted a pair of security guards in dark suits standing near the VIP lounge entrance. Jason pointed a shaking finger directly at me, frantically waving the guards over. He was out of options, out of lies, and entirely out of his depth. He was calling security to violently remove the threat he could not outsmart, desperate to silence the woman who held the matches to his burning paper kingdom. Before the security guards could even cross the polished teak deck to reach me, a figure in a stunning diamond-encrusted evening gown stepped directly into their path. It was Vanessa Sterling. The billionaire heiress and my brother's future bride moved with the arrogant, unyielding grace of someone who had never been told no in her life. She held a crystal goblet filled to the brim with dark vintage red wine. She raised one perfectly manicured hand, casually waving off the approaching guards. She did not need hired muscle to handle a problem. She intended to handle it herself. Vanessa turned her sharp, dark eyes on me. Up close, I could clearly see why Jason had targeted her. She was undeniably beautiful, wrapped in wealth and privilege, but her expression was currently marred by an entitled, ugly sneer. She had clearly been briefed by Jason about my sudden, terrifying appearance on the yacht. My brother had likely spun a pathetic tale painting me as a deranged, desperate relative trying to ruin his magical evening out of sheer bitterness. So you are the infamous Valerie, Vanessa said, her voice dripping with absolute condescension. It carried just enough volume to ensure the nearby guests, who were already watching the drama unfold, could hear every single syllable. Jason warned me you might try to pull a stunt like this. He told me all about his toxic, estranged sister, who simply cannot stand to see him succeed. I stood my ground, my posture completely relaxed. I did not interrupt her. Inside my clutch, the hidden audio recorder was capturing every piece of the delusional narrative my brother had fed her. I needed her to keep talking. I know exactly why you sneaked onto my father's yacht tonight. Vanessa continued, taking a deliberate step closer, invading my personal space. You are broke. You are pathetic. You saw Jason building a highly successful firm, making a prominent name for himself, marrying into a family of real wealth, and you could not handle the intense jealousy. You came here looking for a handout. You thought you could cause a scene and extort my fiancé for cash just to go away. Well, let me make this incredibly clear to you right now. You are getting absolutely nothing from us. She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering mockingly on my emerald silk dress. It was a masterpiece of tailoring, but to Vanessa, primed by Jason's extensive lies to view me as a peasant, it was just a target. She shifted her weight, and with a calculated, deliberate flick of her wrist, she tipped her crystal goblet forward. The dark red wine cascaded out of the glass. It splashed directly against my chest, the crimson liquid rapidly soaking into the expensive green silk, staining the fabric and dripping heavily down the front of my gown to pool on the teak deck below. A sudden collective audible gasp echoed loudly from the surrounding circle of elite guests. A few people stepped backward, shocked by the blatant, aggressive display of hostility from the evening's hostess. "Oh my goodness!" Vanessa gasped, placing a hand over her mouth in a performance of mock horror that would not have convinced a child. "I am so incredibly sorry. I just lost my balance." But then again, maybe it is fitting. Trash really should look the part when it is being thrown out. She smiled a razor-thin, victorious smile, fully expecting me to break. She expected me to scream, to cry, to lunge at her, or to flee in absolute humiliation. She wanted a reaction to validate her cruelty. I did none of those things. I did not break eye contact with her. I calmly reached over to a nearby cocktail table, picked up a crisp, white linen napkin, and gently dabbed at the heavy wine stains ruining my dress. My movements were slow, precise, and entirely devoid of panic or shame. The crowd watched in stunned silence, completely unnerved by my absolute lack of an emotional reaction. Once I had blotted the worst of the spill, I dropped the stained napkin onto the silver tray. I looked Vanessa dead in the eye. The chilling, predatory calm radiating from my gaze caused her smug smile to falter for a fraction of a second. She thought she was establishing dominance. She had no idea she had just poured wine on the one woman who held the absolute power to save her from catastrophic financial ruin. She was willingly marrying a man who was actively plotting to steal her entire trust fund, and here she was vehemently defending him. "You will regret that glass of wine very soon, Vanessa," I said. My voice was a low, lethal whisper that sliced through the quiet tension on the deck. It was not a threat born of petty anger. It was a concrete promise of the absolute devastation that was currently speeding toward her perfectly curated life. I did not wait for her to formulate a response. I did not wait for the security guards who were now awkwardly hovering a few feet away. I simply turned on my heel and walked toward the exit ramp. The crowd of billionaires and socialites automatically parted to let me through, stepping aside as if I were royalty. Even soaked in red wine, I walked with my head held high, my spine straight, and my dignity completely intact. As I descended the gangway and stepped back onto the private marina dock, I reached into my clutch and pressed the small button on my recording device, saving the audio file. The small flashing green indicator light finally went dark. I had everything I needed. I had my parents openly admitting they would bribe me to protect a fraud. I had Jason publicly failing to answer basic financial questions. And now I had Vanessa Sterling on tape verbally confirming the exact lies my brother had used to manipulate her. My private driver quickly opened the heavy car door to the waiting luxury town car. I slid into the leather seat, the cold, wet silk of my completely ruined dress clinging to my skin. I did not care about the fabric. The intelligence I had just gathered was worth 1,000 designer gowns. Jason thought he had won a battle by having his fiancée humiliate me in front of her powerful friends. He did not realize I had just secured the final pieces of ammunition required to win the entire war. The yacht party was over, but the real execution was only just beginning. 3 days remained until the wedding. The clock was ticking down to the absolute destruction of Jason's carefully constructed fraud. Inside the fortified glass walls of Vanguard Financial Forensics, the atmosphere was a controlled, high-stakes frenzy. My team had spent the 72 hours since the yacht party verifying every single offshore transaction, encrypting the audio files I had captured, and building an impenetrable legal cage around my brother. We were no longer just investigating a suspicious groom. We were preparing a comprehensive prosecution package. That morning, My private phone vibrated on the polished surface of my desk. A notification flashed on the screen from a secure courier service. A high-priority physical package, dispatched directly from the executive offices of Marcus Sterling, had just been marked as delivered. It was the official heavily embossed VIP table invitation for the wedding reception. Marcus, true to his word as a billionaire who demanded to know everything about the people handling his business, had personally ensured that the CEO of Vanguard Financial Forensics received a premier seat at his daughter's wedding. However, there was a minor administrative oversight. Because my personal residential profile had been shielded under several layers of corporate privacy for years, the courier service had defaulted to the last publicly registered address attached to my name, my old cramped first-floor apartment in the suburbs, the same apartment my brother had demanded I mortgage to fund his lavish lifestyle just 10 days ago. Before I could even instruct my assistant David to contact the courier and reroute the delivery to my penthouse, my phone buzzed a second time. This notification was not an automated tracking update. It was a direct text message from my mother, Patricia. I unlocked the screen and opened the message. There, glaring back at me in high definition, was a photograph of my mother's manicured hand holding a heavy cream-colored envelope. The wax seal bearing the Sterling family crest had been aggressively torn open. Inside rested a thick gold-foiled invitation card specifically requesting my presence at the head VIP table. Below the photograph was a block of text dripping with toxic, arrogant malice. The courier was confused looking for you at this pathetic little complex. I happened to be driving by to collect some of my old mail you accidentally received. I did you a massive favor and took this off his hands. You really thought you could sneak your way into the wedding just because you managed to crash the yacht party? You are delusional, Valerie. The Sterlings must have sent this by mistake, or maybe you hacked their guest registry. Either way, you are not getting it. I am giving this ticket to your second cousin Greg. He actually owns a suit and knows how to behave in polite society. VIP seats are for winners. Know your place and stay in your lane. I sat back in my ergonomic leather chair and stared at the glowing screen of my phone. A normal person would have been absolutely furious. A normal daughter would have felt a crushing wave of betrayal violated by the sheer invasion of privacy and the casual theft of her personal mail. My mother had literally intercepted a federal courier stolen a high-value invitation addressed directly to me, and was now actively giving it away to a distant relative just to spite me. She was so blinded by her hatred and her desperate need to protect Jason that she was committing a federal offense over a piece of gold-foiled cardstock. I did not feel angry. I did not feel violated. I felt a profound chilling sense of amusement. I was utterly and completely unbothered. I locked my phone and tossed it back onto the desk, leaning my head against the high back of my chair. Patricia genuinely believed she had just delivered a fatal, humiliating blow to my ego. She thought she had outsmarted me, successfully blocking my path to the wedding and securing her golden boy's future in one fell swoop. She imagined me sitting in my old cramped apartment, weeping over a stolen invitation, absolutely devastated that I would miss the event of the century. She had no idea that I was currently sitting in a $40 million penthouse suite, surrounded by elite corporate investigators who were tracking her son's illegal gambling debts in real time. She had no idea that the physical piece of paper she had just stolen was entirely meaningless. The paper ticket was a mere formality, a traditional courtesy sent by a billionaire who operated on old-school etiquette. I did not need a piece of cardboard to walk through the front doors of that five-star hotel. I already possessed top-tier digital clearance, hard-coded into the event's security mainframe by Marcus Sterling's personal security director. In fact, Patricia's petty theft had just handed me another beautiful piece of leverage. She was going to show up to a billionaire's heavily guarded VIP table and attempt to seat a random uninvited cousin in a chair explicitly reserved for the CEO of the firm investigating her son. The security team would flag the discrepancy immediately. She was actively setting herself up for a massive, humiliating public scene before the reception even officially began. It was a flawless, self-executing trap, and she had gleefully locked the shackles around her own wrists. Let her keep the ticket. I thought, a slow, predatory smile touching the corners of my mouth. Let her dress Cousin Greg in his rented suit. Let them walk into that ballroom radiating unearned confidence and stolen prestige. The higher they climbed on their pedestal of lies, the harder the concrete floor was going to feel when they finally crashed. David knocked twice and stepped into my office holding a secure, encrypted tablet. He looked serious, his eyes focused entirely on the upcoming operation. "Valerie," he announced, his voice tight with professional urgency. "The secure link is ready now." I took the encrypted tablet from David and nodded, signaling him to step out and secure the perimeter of my office. The heavy oak door clicked shut, sealing me inside a soundproof environment designed for the most sensitive corporate conversations on the planet. I walked back to my desk, set the tablet on a specialized docking station, and entered a randomized 12-digit alphanumeric passcode to authenticate my identity. The screen flashed solid black for a fraction of a second before the military-grade encryption software established the connection. The image of Marcus Sterling materialized on the high-definition display. He was sitting in what appeared to be a private study lined with dark mahogany shelves and rare first-edition books. Even through a digital screen, the sheer gravity of his presence was overwhelming. He was a self-made titan, a man who had clawed his way up from absolutely nothing to command a global logistics empire. Usually his face was a mask of impenetrable stoicism, carefully guarded to reveal nothing to competitors. Tonight, however, that mask had completely shattered. Marcus was furious. A dark, terrifying rage radiated from his rigid posture and his clenched jaw. His eyes burned with a lethal intensity as he leaned closer to the camera lens. "Valerie," Marcus began, his deep baritone voice rumbling with barely suppressed hostility. "I have spent the last 3 hours reviewing the preliminary data packet your forensic team delivered to my secure server. I had my personal team of financial advisors attempt to verify the figures, hoping to God that there was some sort of glitch in your extraction algorithm. They just confirmed your findings, every single digit." I kept my posture relaxed, maintaining steady eye contact with the billionaire. "The data never lies, Mr. Sterling. Numbers do not care about wedding invitations or high society etiquette." He slammed his fist down onto his desk, the sudden violence of the gesture rattling the camera on his end. $2 million, he roared, his composure cracking. A $2 million deficit to an underground sports betting syndicate. This arrogant, pathetic excuse for a man has been sitting at my dining room table drinking my wine and holding my daughter's hand while owing his actual life to violent loan sharks. I watched him vent his fury, allowing him the space to process the catastrophic betrayal. This was the raw, ugly reality of my profession. I delivered the truth that destroyed carefully curated illusions. "He is not just a broke fraud playing dress-up," Marcus continued, his voice dropping to a dangerous, gravelly whisper. "If he was just trying to marry into money because he was poor, I could handle him. I deal with gold diggers every day of the week. But this is not passive greed. Your report explicitly outlines his timeline. He specifically targeted Vanessa. He orchestrated their entire relationship because he found out her maternal trust fund activates the moment she signs a marriage certificate. He intends to drain her accounts within 48 hours of the wedding to pay off his illegal debts and save his own skin. He is planning to use my daughter as a human shield against a violent criminal syndicate." "That is correct," I confirmed smoothly. "Our intercepts of his encrypted communications verify that his creditors gave him an ultimatum. He promised them a massive liquidity injection by next Monday. The timeline aligns perfectly with your daughter's trust fund maturation protocols. Once the marriage is legally binding, he gains spousal access to the secondary accounts, allowing him to wire the funds offshore before your legal team could even file an injunction. He would leave her completely bankrupt and legally tied to organized crime." Marcus leaned back in his leather chair, running a heavy hand over his face. He looked momentarily exhausted, the weight of a father's worst nightmare pressing down on his shoulders. He had built an empire to protect his child, only to invite the wolf directly through the front door. "I will destroy him," Marcus stated, his eyes locking back onto mine with a cold, absolute certainty. "I will crush this boy so completely that he will wish those loan sharks had gotten to him first. I am going to dispatch my security team to his rented apartment right now. I will have him dragged out into the street, and I will personally see to it that he spends the next 2 decades rotting in a federal penitentiary for attempted wire fraud." Before we discuss the execution of his downfall, I interjected. Keeping my tone perfectly level, we need to address the methodology of the investigation. You hired Vanguard because you suspected a minor discrepancy in his corporate profile. You did not anticipate a criminal conspiracy of this magnitude. Marcus narrowed his eyes, his sharp business instincts cutting through his paternal rage. He leaned forward again, studying me through the screen. "That brings me to a very critical question, Valerie. The offshore ledgers your team accessed to expose his gambling debts are buried behind some of the most aggressive financial firewalls on the planet. My own internal auditor's men who used to work for the Treasury Department could not find a single trace of these accounts during their initial background checks last year. Jason's digital footprint was scrubbed clean. He looked like a perfectly legitimate, moderately successful risk management executive." He paused, his expression shifting from anger to intense, calculated suspicion. "The level of detail in your report is unprecedented for a 48-hour turnaround. You bypassed encrypted Cayman Island, holding accounts, retrieved deleted text messages, and mapped out a criminal conspiracy that took him years to build. I pay you for excellence, Valerie, but this goes beyond standard forensic capabilities. This looks like you already had a back door into his life. How did your firm access such deeply buried offshore ledgers so quickly? How did you know exactly where to look?" I held his intense gaze, preparing to deliver the truth. "Because the man trying to con you is my biological brother," I said, my voice cutting through the digital connection with absolute precision. "And the corporate portfolio he submitted to prove his worth, the crisis management case studies, the $50 million European rescue operation, the entire history of that firm belongs entirely to me." Marcus Sterling stopped breathing. For several long, agonizing seconds, the billionaire did not move a single muscle. He stared at me through the screen, processing the magnitude of the revelation. The silence in my office was absolute, matching the profound shock radiating from his private study. He looked down at the physical copy of the portfolio resting on his desk, his eyes tracing the fabricated name on the cover, then slowly brought his gaze back up to meet mine. "Your brother Marcus," repeated, his voice barely a whisper, as if testing the words to see if they were real. "The man who has been sleeping under my roof, eating at my table, and holding my daughter is your brother. And he stole your entire corporate identity to infiltrate my family." "Yes," I replied smoothly. "Jason has not worked a legitimate day in his life. My parents have funded his illusions for decades, and when they ran out of retirement money, they demanded I mortgage my own home to cover his share of the wedding expenses. When I refused, they disowned me and explicitly forbade me from attending the wedding to protect his fragile facade. He thought stealing the work of my entire career was the perfect crime because he assumed I would quietly fade into the background." The shock on his face rapidly morphed into a terrifying volcanic rage. The veins in his neck bulged against his crisp shirt collar. He abruptly pushed his heavy leather chair back and stood up, pacing behind his desk like a caged predator. He grabbed his cellular phone from the charging dock, his fingers jabbing violently at the screen. "That is it!" Marcus growled, his eyes blazing with fury. "I am shutting this entire circus down right now. I am calling my head of security. I will have Jason thrown out of the penthouse, and I am calling Vanessa to tell her the wedding is officially canceled. I will ruin him before the sun comes up. Do not make that call." "Mr. Sterling," I commanded. My voice cracked like a whip across the video feed, sharp enough to make the billionaire pause, with his thumb hovering over the dial button. "Put the phone down. If you make that call right now, you will lose your daughter forever." Marcus glared at the camera, bristling at being given an order. "Excuse me," he snapped. That fraud is planning to bankrupt my child and hand her over to a violent gambling syndicate. I am not going to sit around and wait while he continues to sleep in the same bed as Vanessa. I am ending this tonight. You are thinking like a corporate executive dismantling a hostile takeover, I explained, keeping my tone perfectly measured and authoritative. But you are dealing with a master manipulator who has spent his entire life perfecting the art of playing the victim. If you cancel this wedding in private, Jason will instantly spin a narrative that makes you look like the villain. I leaned closer to the camera, ensuring he understood the gravity of the psychological warfare we were fighting. Think about how deeply he has already manipulated Vanessa, I continued. He has convinced her that I am a toxic, jealous, estranged sister out to destroy his happiness. If you cancel the wedding based on my report, Jason will look Vanessa right in the eyes, cry fake tears, and swear that his bitter sister fabricated the entire dossier just to ruin his life out of pure spite. He will tell her that her father is controlling, that you never wanted them to be happy, and that you bought into a web of lies because you think he is not good enough for your family. Marcus slowly lowered his phone, the realization dawning on him. Vanessa loves him. He admitted the anger in his voice, giving way to a heavy paternal dread. She defends him constantly. She fought with me last month when I suggested a more aggressive prenuptial agreement. Exactly, I said. If you force them apart tonight, Jason becomes a tragic martyr. Vanessa will resent you for the rest of her life for ruining her fairy tale. She might even elope with him out of sheer rebellion, completely blinding herself to the truth, until it is too late. You cannot just tell a victim that they are being conned. You have to let them see the monster for themselves. You have to force the con artist to drop his mask in a setting where he cannot control the narrative, where he cannot hide behind closed doors, and where he cannot manipulate her emotions in private. Marcus sat back down slowly, placing his phone face down on the desk. He steepled his fingers, his business instincts fully engaging with my strategy. So what exactly are you proposing, Valerie? How do we extract my daughter from this parasite without turning him into a victim? We execute his character publicly, undeniably, and flawlessly, I replied, a cold smile touching my lips. We let him have his perfect wedding day. We let him put on his custom tuxedo, stand at the altar, and believe he has successfully won the ultimate prize. We let him sit down at the reception surrounded by powerful elites, and then we tear his world apart piece by piece on the main stage. He will never escape the sheer absolute humiliation of that sudden, massive downfall, because we will project his lies for all to see. His facade will be shattered permanently. Marcus nodded, his expression turning ruthless and cold. I agree completely. Let us burn his entire world to the ground on Saturday night. Saturday morning broke over Chicago with the kind of brilliant, deceptive sunshine that made the city look peaceful. Inside my penthouse, however, the atmosphere was entirely clinical and razor-sharp. I stood in front of my floor-to-ceiling mirrors, but I was not looking at my reflection to admire it. I was inspecting armor. Today was not a day for silk dresses or subtle elegance. I reached into my closet and pulled out a bespoke bone-white power suit. The cut was aggressive, the shoulders sharp enough to cut glass, and the lines tailored to project absolute, uncompromising authority. I did not want to look like a wedding guest. I wanted to look like an executioner. Across the city, in the opulent presidential suite of a 5-star downtown hotel, my family was drowning in champagne and delusion. Jason stood before a gilded mirror, adjusting the bow tie of his custom velvet tuxedo. He took a sip from a crystal flute, admiring his own reflection with a sickening level of adoration. We did it, he announced to the room, swirling the expensive champagne. By midnight tonight, I will have unrestricted access to the Sterling Trust. I will wipe out those aggressive creditors by Monday morning, and I will still have enough left over to buy that yacht we saw in Monaco. My mother, Patricia, lounged on a velvet sofa, having her hair pinned up by a private stylist she was undoubtedly charging to Marcus Sterling's tab. She let out a sharp, triumphant laugh. You deserve it, Jason, Patricia cooed, waving her hand dismissively. You have always been destined for greatness. I just wish your miserable sister could see us now. Can you imagine Valerie sitting in her tiny, pathetic apartment right now crying over her stolen VIP ticket? She genuinely thought she could ruin this family. Richard, my father chuckled darkly from the corner where he was pouring himself another drink. She is a weak, jealous girl who could not handle your success, Jason. Let her rot in her mediocrity. Today is about the sterling merger. We are untouchable now. They raised their glasses in a toast to their own spectacular greed, entirely convinced they had successfully banished me from their golden future. I walked over to my desk, my white suit crisp and flawless. I did not have a glass of champagne to toast with. Instead, I held a sleek, encrypted titanium flash drive. I plugged it into my secure terminal and watched the progress bar on my monitor. I was manually transferring the digital prosecution package my team had finalized overnight. I watched the files copy over one by one. The offshore bank statements showing his massive deficits. The aggressive, threatening emails from the underground gambling syndicate demanding their $2 million. The stolen Vanguard corporate portfolio with his fraudulent name plastered over my hard work. And finally, the pristine high-definition audio files of my parents and Jason admitting to their malicious schemes on the yacht and in the hallway of my childhood home. Jason checked his gold watch, a replica he had bought to look the part of a billionaire CEO. He adjusted his cufflinks, smiling at his parents. "The ceremony is at 4, he said, his voice dripping with arrogance. "But the real magic happens at the reception. Marcus told me he is giving me a prime spot during the toasts to introduce my risk management firm to his partners. He practically begged me to network with his board of directors. I'm going to have these old money fools eating out of the palm of my hand." Patricia clapped her hands together in sheer delight. "You are going to be running that entire logistics empire within 5 years, Jason. Marcus is an old man. He needs a sharp young visionary to take the reins." The progress bar on my monitor hit 100%. The screen flashed green, indicating the transfer was complete, and the payload was fully armed. I safely ejected the titanium drive and slipped it into the inner pocket of my white blazer. It felt heavy against my chest, a tiny piece of metal containing enough explosive truth to completely obliterate a man's life. David, my executive assistant, knocked once and stepped into my office. He was wearing a dark, sharp suit holding a secure, encrypted tablet. "The audiovisual team at the hotel reception has been compromised and secured, Valerie," he reported smoothly. Marcus Sterling's personal security director bypassed the hotel staff. The main projection screens and the audio feeds in the grand ballroom are now routed directly to this tablet. Whenever you give the signal, we control the entire room. Jason took one final look in the mirror, flashing a devastatingly handsome, entirely hollow smile. He patted his jacket pocket, ensuring his handwritten vows were ready. He had spent hours copying romantic poetry from the internet, crafting a speech designed to manipulate Vanessa into absolute submission. "Let us go secure the bag," he told his parents, grabbing his room key. They walked out of the presidential suite like royalty, their heads held high, completely oblivious to the fact that they were marching directly toward a slaughterhouse. I picked up my phone. Marcus Sterling had sent a single encrypted text message. "The trap is set. I will see you at the reception." I locked my phone and walked toward the private elevator. I did not feel nervous. I did not feel any lingering familial guilt. I felt the cold, mechanical precision of a surgeon preparing to excise a cancerous tumor. My family had spent my entire life trying to make me feel small. They had stolen my resources, mocked my ambitions, and literally tried to erase my identity to feed their own insatiable greed. They had demanded I stay in my lane and know my place. I stepped into the elevator and pressed the button for the ground floor. I was about to show them exactly where my place was, and I was going to make sure they never ever forgot it. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was a staggering monument to excessive wealth. Thousands of imported white orchids spilled over the gold-rimmed tables, scenting the air with a heavy floral fragrance. 500 of the most powerful people in the country sat in plush velvet chairs, their designer gowns and bespoke tuxedos blending into a sea of absolute privilege. Waiters glided silently across the floor, topping off flutes with vintage champagne. At the head table, elevated on a platform draped in silk, sat the guests of honor. Jason wore his custom velvet tuxedo, looking like a king surveying his newly conquered kingdom. He held Vanessa Sterling by the hand, playing the role of the devoted newlywed to perfection. Vanessa looked blindly happy, completely mesmerized by the charming fraud sitting beside her. Sitting just a few feet away was Marcus Sterling. The billionaire sat with terrifying stillness. He was watching my family bask in their stolen glory, his face an impenetrable mask. He knew exactly what was about to happen. A melodic chime rang out as my mother tapped her silver spoon against her flute. The low hum of elite conversation died down, replaced by expectant silence. Patricia and Richard stood up from their seats of honor and walked toward the center of the stage. They stepped up to the gold-plated microphone stand. My mother smoothed the skirt of her heavily beaded gown, projecting the false humility she had practiced for months. She leaned into the microphone, her voice carrying a sickeningly sweet warmth. "Good evening, esteemed guests, family and friends." Patricia began, her voice echoing perfectly. "Richard and I are completely overwhelmed with joy tonight. Looking out at all of you, we are reminded of the incredible journey it took to get here. We come from a simple, honest background. We built our lives on the core values of integrity, hard work, and absolute transparency, and we poured every ounce of those values into raising our wonderful son, Jason." She was proudly standing in front of 500 billionaires, corporate moguls, and federal judges, giving a masterclass in aggressive, unashamed hypocrisy. She was openly preaching about high integrity while actively covering up a $2 million gambling debt and a completely stolen, highly confidential corporate brand identity. Richard leaned in, taking the microphone with a practiced smile. "That is right, Patricia. We raised Jason to understand that true wealth is about character. Jason built his risk management empire from the ground up, using nothing but his brilliant mind and his relentless work ethic. He never took the easy way out. He earned his success through pure honesty. And watching him merge his life with the beautiful, brilliant Vanessa Sterling brings tears to my eyes. We are merging two families built on identical foundations of honor." Jason nodded humbly from his seat, placing a hand over his heart in a display of false modesty. He smiled at Vanessa, who beamed back at him, utterly convinced she had married the most honorable man in the room. The elite guests murmured their polite approval, entirely buying into the wholesome narrative my parents were aggressively selling. Patricia picked up her champagne flute, holding it high in the air. "So please, everyone," Patricia commanded, her voice soaring with triumphant glee. "Raise your glasses with us. Let us toast to Jason and Vanessa. Let us toast to the future of our two great families. Let us toast to a legacy of unbreakable trust, absolute truth, and a love that cannot be corrupted." 500 crystal glasses rose in the air in perfect, synchronized harmony. At that exact fraction of a second, the heavy mahogany double doors at the absolute rear of the grand ballroom were violently shoved open. The heavy brass handles hit the walls with a dull, resonant thud. I stepped right into the threshold. I was wearing my bone-white, sharply tailored power suit. Against the sea of dark tuxedos and pastel evening gowns, I stood out like a lightning strike in a pitch-black sky. I did not hover at the edges. I stood dead center in the doorway, radiating an aura of pure, uncompromising authority. The titanium flash drive felt secure in my inner blazer pocket. Up in the hidden audiovisual booth, my executive assistant David executed his order flawlessly. He killed the background ambient music instantly. The sudden absolute silence in the massive ballroom was deafening. It was an instant terrifying vacuum of sound that sucked the air out of the room. Hundreds of heads turned simultaneously. The elite guests lowered their champagne glasses, their eyes locking onto the lone woman standing in the doorway in a stark white suit. The collective confusion rippled through the crowd like a physical wave. I began to walk. My heels clicked against the polished marble floor with a slow, deliberate precision. I did not rush. I walked straight down the center aisle, passing tables of bewildered socialites. I kept my eyes locked entirely on the stage. On the stage, Patricia froze. Her arm was still raised in the air, holding the crystal flute. Her triumphant smile melted off her face in a fraction of a second, replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated terror. She stared at me, her eyes widening so far, I thought they might roll out of her head. Her brain short-circuited, entirely unable to process the impossible reality that her disowned daughter had just bypassed a billionaire's security detail and walked into the center of her crowning achievement. The muscles in her hand completely gave out. The crystal champagne flute slipped through her trembling fingers. It plummeted toward the stage and shattered violently against the hardwood platform. The sharp sound of breaking glass echoed like a gunshot through the silent ballroom. The bubbling champagne splashed across her very expensive designer shoes, but she did not even look down. She just stood there paralyzed, watching her executioner walk calmly and steadily toward the stage to end it. Jason vaulted over the edge of the elevated platform. His practiced demeanor evaporated the second he saw me marching down the center aisle. The sophisticated groom persona vanished, replaced instantly by the panicked bully I had known my entire life. His face turned a furious crimson, clashing violently with his custom velvet tuxedo. He stomped down the stairs, his footsteps thudding against the floorboards as he charged toward me. The elite guests seated around us began to whisper. A confused murmur swept through the ballroom as the titans of industry tried to comprehend the disruption. They watched with morbid fascination as the groom intercepted the lone woman in the white power suit. Jason met me halfway down the aisle. He did not ask me to leave quietly. He did not attempt to handle the situation with grace. He lunged forward and clamped his hand around my right bicep. His bruising grip dug sharply into the fabric of my tailored blazer, a physical manifestation of his sheer terror. "What are you doing here?" Jason hissed, his voice a venomous whisper meant only for my ears. "I told you if you showed your face tonight, I would destroy you. Turn around right now and walk out the back door, or I will have security throw you onto the pavement." I did not pull my arm away. I did not wince at the pain radiating from his tight grip. I simply stopped walking, tilted my head slightly, and looked at him with an expression of absolute chilling boredom. I let my eyes slowly travel down to his hand clutching my arm, and then back up to his sweating, desperate face. "You are wrinkling my suit, Jason," I stated, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "And you are making a massive scene in front of your billionaire father-in-law. I suggest you let go." My lack of fear only enraged him further. In his mind, I was still the obedient, discarded little sister who was supposed to cower when he raised his voice. He could not process the cold authority radiating from my posture. His panic hijacked whatever small amount of logic he possessed. Instead of quietly ushering me toward the exit, Jason made a fatal, catastrophic miscalculation. He decided to drag me directly toward the head VIP table to publicly humiliate me and control the narrative before I could speak. "Come with me," he snarled, yanking my arm forcefully. "You want to make a scene in front of my family? Fine. Let us show them exactly what you are." He pulled me forward, marching me aggressively past the remaining guest tables. I did not struggle. I let him lead me directly to the slaughter. I walked with perfect posture alongside him, maintaining my calm, authoritative stride, while he dragged me like an unruly prisoner. We approached the main VIP table, situated just below the stage. The table was draped in heavy gold silk and surrounded by the most powerful people in the room. Sitting directly in the center was Marcus Sterling. The logistics billionaire watched our approach with terrifying stillness. His hands rested flat on the tabletop, his dark eyes locked onto Jason. Beside him sat Vanessa, looking completely bewildered, her hands clutching her extravagant wedding gown. Jason stopped abruptly right in front of Marcus. He shoved me slightly forward, presenting me like a captured criminal to a reigning monarch. He quickly smoothed his expression, forcing his features into a mask of deep, sorrowful apology. He was playing the noble, victimized groom, desperately trying to salvage his golden ticket. "I am so incredibly sorry, sir," Jason announced, projecting his voice so the surrounding tables could hear his performance. "I tried to handle this quietly, but she refused to leave. This is Valerie. She is my estranged, mentally ill sister." A collective gasp rippled through the nearby guests. Vanessa covered her mouth with her hand, looking at me with a mixture of shock and disdain. Jason tightened his grip on my arm, leaning into his fabricated tragedy. "She has been deeply unstable for years." Jason continued, shaking his head with fake manufactured sadness. We have tried everything to get her the psychological help she needs, but she refused our support and cut ties with the family. She has a history of severe delusions and extreme jealousy. When she found out I was marrying into your prestigious family, her envy must have pushed her over the edge. She is the failure of our family, sir. I am so deeply embarrassed that she would crash our wedding just to cause a psychotic scene. Before Marcus could respond, a frantic scrambling noise came from the stage behind us. Patricia and Richard were practically sprinting down the stairs. My mother had completely abandoned her shattered champagne glass. She tripped over the hem of her heavily beaded gown in her haste to reach the VIP table. My father bumped into a waiter, ignoring the spilled drinks as he rushed to Jason's side. They flanked my brother, presenting a united, desperate front to the billionaire. Patricia looked at Marcus with wide, frantic eyes, immediately launching into aggressive damage control. She clasped her hands together in a pleading gesture. "Mr. Sterling, we are so profoundly sorry for this pathetic intrusion," Patricia cried, her voice quivering with fake humiliation. "We explicitly forbade her from coming near this venue. We knew her mental state was deteriorating, and we wanted to protect your beautiful daughter from her toxic presence. She has always tried to ruin Jason's accomplishments out of pure hateful spite." Richard nodded vigorously, stepping forward to block me from Marcus's view. "Please forgive us, sir," my father begged, completely discarding any remaining shred of his own dignity to protect the lie. "She is a deeply sick, unemployed woman who has completely lost her grip on reality. We will have hotel security escort her to a psychiatric facility immediately. We will not let her ruin this perfect merger of our families. Please do not let her pathetic desperation cast a shadow over Jason and Vanessa's beautiful night." They stood there, a trio of desperate frauds, entirely convinced they had just successfully neutralized the threat. They believed they had woven a flawless narrative of mental illness and jealousy that would explain away anything I might try to say. They thought they had Marcus Sterling completely fooled. I did not defend myself. I did not scream that they were lying. I stood there in my immaculate white suit, looking directly at the billionaire sitting across the table, waiting for the execution to officially begin. Marcus Sterling did not respond to the frantic chorus of my parents and brother. He sat at the head of the mahogany table, his hands resting flat against the crisp tablecloth. The silence from the VIP section was thick, rolling across the grand ballroom until every guest ceased their conversations. The clinking of silverware stopped. 500 pairs of eyes locked onto the stage area, watching the billionaire evaluate the bizarre spectacle unfolding in front of him. Jason tightened his grip on my arm. He shot a desperate glance at Vanessa, who stared at me as if I were a venomous snake. Patricia and Richard held their breath. They waited for Marcus to wave his hand for security to drag me out into the street. They waited for their glorious victory to be finalized. Instead, Marcus slowly pushed his chair back. He stood up to his imposing height. Marcus was a man who commanded gravity. He buttoned his tuxedo jacket, his dark eyes entirely bypassing my sweating brother. He ignored the pathetic displays of my parents. His gaze bypassed Vanessa altogether. His eyes locked directly and exclusively onto mine. He stepped around the heavy table, moving with deliberate pace. He stopped less than 2 feet away from Jason. Marcus looked at my face, studying my tailored white suit, assessing the absolute calm radiating from my posture. A profound silence engulfed the room. "So it is you," Marcus said, his deep baritone voice carrying effortlessly in the quiet ballroom. "This is unexpected. This is—" Jason let out a loud, relieved sigh. "I know," Sir Jason said eagerly, puffing his chest out. "I am so sorry for this disruption. She is completely unpredictable. I will have the guards escort her out right now so we can get back to the celebration." Marcus did not look at Jason. Instead, he lifted his right arm and extended his hand directly toward me. His palm was open, his fingers firm and steady. It was the undeniable gesture of ultimate professional respect. He was offering me a handshake. Jason froze, his jaw dropping open. His fingers, which had been digging painfully into my biceps, suddenly went completely slack. I pulled my arm free from his weakened grip, stepped forward, and firmly shook the billionaire's hand. It is an honor to finally meet you in person, Mr. Sterling, I said. We usually prefer to keep our crisis interventions strictly digital, but given the circumstances, an in-person consultation seemed necessary. The pleasure is entirely mine, Marcus replied, a genuine smile touching the corners of his mouth. Your reputation is formidable, but your execution in the field is absolutely flawless. Behind me, I heard a sharp gasp. Patricia was staring at our joined hands as if we had both caught fire. Richard staggered back, his face draining of color. Jason looked like he had just been struck by lightning. His eyes darted frantically between my face and Marcus's extended hand. Marcus released my hand and turned gracefully toward the center of the VIP table. He picked up the golden microphone resting next to his floral centerpiece. He tapped it once, ensuring the audio feed was active. The sound boomed through the massive speakers lining the walls of the grand ballroom. Ladies and gentlemen, Marcus announced, his voice commanding the absolute attention of every elite guest in the room. I apologize for the sudden interruption to the evening's festivities. However, a highly anticipated guest has just arrived, and a formal introduction is absolutely mandatory. He stepped back, gesturing toward me with a sweep of his arm. The spotlight operator taking the cue shifted the bright beam of light directly onto my white suit. I stood perfectly still, projecting absolute untouchable power. My new son-in-law Jason just introduced this woman as his estranged mentally ill sister. Marcus continued, his voice dripping with dangerous irony. He claimed she is an unemployed failure who sneaked in here out of petty jealousy. But I'm afraid Jason has been remarkably humble about his family connections. In fact, he has been completely lying. A collective murmur of shock rippled through the crowd. Vanessa stood up from her chair, her face a mask of total confusion. "Dad, what are you doing?" she asked, trembling. Marcus ignored her, keeping his fierce gaze locked on the audience. "Please allow me to introduce the woman standing before you. She is not a failure. She is not unemployed. This is Valerie. She is the founder and chief executive officer of Vanguard Financial Forensics. She is the most brilliant, ruthless corporate investigator in this country. Just last week, her elite firm executed a classified rescue operation that saved my global logistics supply chain from a devastating $50 million deficit. She is a titan in her own right, and she is standing here tonight as my most honored VIP guest." The ballroom erupted into a cacophony of gasps and frantic whispers. 500 of the most powerful people in the country stared at me with profound awe. They recognized the Vanguard name immediately. My firm was legendary in their circles. Jason stumbled backward, his knees buckling slightly, as if the gravity in the room had suddenly doubled. He crashed into the edge of the head table, knocking over a silver water pitcher. His face was a portrait of pure terror. He finally realized that the billionaire he was trying to con was an active, loyal client of the very sister he had just tried to humiliate. Patricia clutched her chest tightly, desperately struggling to pull oxygen into her burning lungs. The reality of her colossal mistake was crushing her alive. She had disowned a multi-millionaire CEO to protect a broke, fraudulent gambler. Richard looked like he was about to have a massive heart attack, his eyes wide and vacant. They were completely paralyzed, with absolute shock, trapped in the center of the grand ballroom, entirely unable to escape the brutal, humiliating execution they had demanded. Jason let out a high-pitched, strangled noise that was somewhere between a cough and a laugh. He grabbed the edge of the table to steady his trembling knees. The sheer magnitude of the revelation had completely shattered his cognitive processing. He looked at Marcus, then at the silent crowd, and finally attempted to deploy the only weapon he had left: his pathological ability to lie. "Wow. Okay, you got me," Jason stammered, forcing a wide, frantic grin onto his sweating face. "That is a brilliant joke, Mr. Sterling. Really top-tier wedding humor. I guess Valerie and I just love playing these little sibling pranks on each other. You know how it is. She is a genius, obviously. We just like to keep things interesting. Right, Val?" He looked at me, his eyes wide and begging. He was silently pleading with me to play along, to save his life, to grab the life raft he was offering. He actually thought he could charm his way out of a public execution by pretending the last 10 minutes had been a scripted comedy routine. No one in the ballroom laughed. Not a single polite chuckle echoed from the 500 guests. They just stared at him with cold, clinical disgust. I did not smile back. I walked slowly toward Marcus Sterling. He nodded respectfully and handed me the golden microphone. The cold metal felt heavy and perfect in my hand. I turned to face the vast sea of faces, and then I locked my gaze entirely on my brother. The time for polite undercover surveillance was officially over. It was time to pull the trigger. "We are not playing a prank, Jason," I said, my voice echoing through the massive speakers with crisp, undeniable authority. "And we are certainly not collaborating on a joke. I am just finally shining a very bright spotlight on the pathetic, fraudulent reality you have spent your entire life trying to hide." I stepped closer to the edge of the stage, looking down at Patricia and Richard. They shrank back under my stare, physically cowering from the daughter they had just confidently abused. 10 minutes ago, my parents stood on this stage and preached to all of you about their deep family values, I announced to the silent ballroom. They boasted about their elite, honest background. They told you they raised a brilliant, hardworking son who built an empire from the ground up. I paused, letting the weight of their earlier lies hang in the air. Let me tell you the actual truth about the elite family standing before you. Exactly 1 week ago, I was summoned to my parents' suburban home. I was not called there to celebrate this beautiful merger. I was ordered to appear so my brother could throw a legal document in my face. He demanded that I sign a mortgage transfer on my small personal apartment. He wanted to take out a $150,000 loan against my only property. A murmur of pure shock rippled through the front row of tables. Several prominent investors exchanged appalled glances. He did not want that money to invest in a business. I continued, my voice sharp and relentless. He wanted it to pay for his share of the luxury yacht party you all enjoyed this weekend. He wanted to buy ice sculptures and bespoke velvet tuxedos to convince the Sterling family that he belonged in your world. He demanded that I risk rendering myself completely homeless so he could afford to play pretend in high society. Patricia let out a muffled sob, burying her face in her hands. Richard stared at the floor, his entire body rigid with shame. And when I looked at my brother and refused to fund his delusion, I said, my tone growing even colder. My mother did not try to mediate. She lunged across the coffee table and slapped me across the face. She called me a jealous, useless burden who was actively trying to sabotage her golden boy's integration into the Sterling dynasty. My father then stepped in, not to defend me, but to officially disown me. He told me I was no longer his daughter. He kicked me out of his house and explicitly forbade me from ever showing my face at this wedding, terrified that my mere presence would humiliate Jason in front of his wealthy new family. I turned back to Jason, who was now gripping the table so hard his knuckles were stark white. He looked like he might actually vomit on his rented shoes. "You stood here tonight and told this entire room of distinguished guests that I was an estranged, mentally ill failure," I projected, ensuring every syllable sliced through his ego like a scalpel. "You fabricated a malicious, calculated lie to explain my absence, hoping you could silence me forever. You wanted to discard me while simultaneously stealing the credibility of my success to secure your place at this table." I swept my hand toward the massive crowd of elites. "You are looking at a man who has never built a single thing in his entire life. My parents drained their own retirement accounts to pay his credit card minimums, and when they ran out of money, they tried to sacrifice me on his altar of greed. There is no risk management empire. There is no brilliant entrepreneur. There is only a desperate, broke coward hiding behind a rented suit supported by two parents who sold their souls to maintain an illusion." Vanessa Sterling let out a sharp, devastated gasp. She pulled her hand away from Jason's arm, scrambling backward in her chair as if he had suddenly caught fire. Marcus Sterling remained standing, his arms crossed, watching my performance with a look of satisfied approval. "You wanted me to know my place, Mom," I said, looking down at Patricia's trembling figure. "You said VIP seats are for winners. I am standing exactly where I belong." I raised my hand and made a sharp, deliberate gesture toward the darkened glass of the audiovisual booth high above the ballroom floor. David, my executive assistant, had been waiting for this exact signal. He did not hesitate. The soft romantic lighting in the room instantly shifted to a harsh clinical white. The massive projection screens flanking the stage, which had previously been displaying a continuous sickly sweet slideshow of Jason and Vanessa's engagement photos, suddenly went entirely black. A collective breath caught in the throats of the guests. Jason whipped his head around to look at the screens, his eyes bulging as the black screens flickered back to life. They were no longer showing pictures of sunset walks on the beach or forced smiles at expensive restaurants. Instead, towering above the elite crowd were high-definition, glaringly bright images of financial ledgers. "Let us take a look at the real Jason," I announced, my voice cutting through the stunned silence. "What you are seeing on the left screen is a direct feed from a deeply buried offshore holding account registered in the Cayman Islands. As you can see by the bold red numbers at the bottom of the ledger, my brother is currently operating with a massive deficit, $2 million to be exact." A massive, uncontrollable wave of shocked muttering immediately rolled through the packed, opulent ballroom. Vanessa gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. Jason looked like he was going to pass out. He lunged toward the stage, waving his arms frantically at the AV booth. "Turn it off!" he screamed, his voice cracking with sheer panic. "Security, shut the screens down right now!" Absolutely no one moved. Marcus Sterling's private security team had already secured the perimeter, and they answered only to the billionaire who was currently watching the destruction of his would-be son-in-law with a cold, satisfied expression. "That $2 million deficit is not from a bad real estate investment or a failed business venture." I continued pacing slowly across the floor. "That debt is owed to an underground sports betting syndicate. My brother has been gambling away money he never had, borrowing from violent, dangerous predators, just to maintain the illusion of his lavish lifestyle. They gave him an ultimatum last week: pay the $2 million by Monday or face severe physical consequences." The image on the right screen shifted. It now displayed a series of intercepted, highly encrypted text messages. The timestamp showed they were sent just days ago. I directed the crowd's attention to the new slide. When a desperate con artist is backed into a lethal corner, he looks for a lifeline, I explained, keeping my tone clinical and relentless. "Read the messages, Jason. Read the texts you sent to your associates detailing your grand escape plan." The messages were magnified so clearly that even the guests in the back row could read every single word. The text on the screen read, "The trust fund unlocks the minute the marriage certificate is signed. I will wire the $2 million to the offshore account before the reception ends. Vanessa will not notice until Monday, and by then the debt is cleared. I will play dumb and blame her financial advisors." Vanessa let out a guttural, devastated sob. She physically recoiled from Jason, her chair scraping violently against the polished floor as she pushed herself away from the head table. She looked at him with an expression of pure, unadulterated horror. He was not marrying her out of love. He was leading her to the slaughter to save his own skin, fully intending to leave her bankrupt and legally entangled with a violent criminal syndicate. Jason dropped to his knees. He actually fell to the floor in his custom velvet tuxedo, holding his hands up toward Vanessa in a pathetic, desperate plea. "Vanessa, please, it is a lie," he begged, tears streaming down his sweating face. "She fabricated all of this. She is a computer hacker. She hates me. She made those messages up to ruin us." I did not let him breathe. I signaled the booth again. The center screen flashed, displaying the glossy cover of the corporate portfolio Jason had handed to Marcus Sterling to prove his worth as a risk management CEO. "He told you he was a brilliant entrepreneur," I projected, making sure my voice reached every corner of the vast room. "He handed you a portfolio detailing a $50 million European supply chain rescue. He claimed he executed a hostile asset recovery in Silicon Valley. But if you look closely at the original documents currently displayed on the screen, you will notice a tiny discrepancy." The massive screen zoomed in on the watermark of the original case files, clearly revealing the bold silver logo of Vanguard Financial Forensics. "He stole my entire corporate identity," I stated coldly. "He took the crisis management reports that I wrote, erased my name, and typed his own over my blood, sweat, and tears. He used my genius to infiltrate your family because he is nothing but a hollow, empty shell of a man. I walked directly up to where Jason was kneeling on the floor. I looked down at him, a broken, shivering mess of a man who had finally run out of lies. My parents watched from the sidelines, completely paralyzed by the sheer magnitude of his public destruction, unable to offer him a single word of defense. They were helplessly witnessing the absolute brutal death of their precious golden boy in front of everyone. "Thanks for borrowing my portfolio to impress Mr. Sterling," I said, my voice dropping to a sharp, lethal tone that was picked up perfectly by the microphone. "It was an exceptionally bold move, Jason. But you forgot one crucial, devastating detail when you tried to pull off the greatest financial con of your entire pathetic life. The offshore accountant currently helping you hide your massive gambling debt actually works for me." Jason's mouth opened and closed silently. He looked exactly like a fish suffocating on dry land. The realization hit him with the force of a high-speed collision. The shadowy fixer he had hired online to bury his tracks, the man who had promised to seamlessly reroute Vanessa's trust fund through untraceable Cayman accounts, was on my payroll. Every piece of incriminating data Jason thought he was hiding had been routed directly to my secure servers in real time. He had literally paid my firm to build his own prison. A guttural, agonizing wail tore through the heavy silence of the ballroom. It was Vanessa. She collapsed forward, her head buried in her hands, her immaculate designer wedding gown pooling around her like a tragic, discarded theatrical costume. The sound of her weeping was visceral, the sound of a woman whose entire universe had just been violently ripped apart. She tore the heavy diamond engagement ring from her finger, the very rock Jason had purchased using a predatory high-interest loan, and hurled it across the stage. The diamond clattered uselessly against the hardwood floor, stopping near my white shoes. Vanessa looked up. Her makeup ruined her eyes wide with a horrific realization. She stared at the man she was supposed to marry. "You never loved me." Vanessa choked out her voice, trembling with absolute devastation. "Every date, every kiss, every promise you made to me was a calculated maneuver. You promised to protect me while actively handing me over to violent loan sharks. You were going to let them destroy my life just to save your own. You are a monster." Marcus Sterling moved with immediate protective purpose. He stepped in front of Vanessa, physically shielding his weeping daughter from the hundreds of staring eyes. He wrapped a heavy, comforting arm around her shaking shoulders, pulling her close to his side. He did not offer empty platitudes. His presence alone was an impenetrable fortress of safety. Then Marcus turned his gaze back to Jason. The billionaire did not shout. He did not need to raise his voice to project lethal absolute power. "You came into my home," Marcus stated, his voice a low, terrifying rumble that echoed ominously through the ballroom microphones. "You sat at my dining table, drank my wine, looked me in the eye and asked for my daughter's hand while secretly planning to serve her to the wolves. You thought you could outsmart me by stealing from a brilliant woman and using her blood to pave your way into my empire. You thought your pathetic facade would hold up against the weight of real power. But you are nothing but a parasite, Jason. And parasites do not survive in my world." Marcus slowly raised his right hand. He made a sharp, decisive gesture toward the rear of the ballroom. The heavy brass doors at the back of the venue swung open for the second time that evening. This time it was not a lone woman making a grand entrance. A squad of 6 men and women in dark windbreakers marched into the extravagant space. The bold yellow letters on the backs of their jackets read, "FBI Financial Crimes Division." They moved with swift, tactical precision, bypassing the stunned guests and heading straight for the VIP table. The sharp clinking of handcuffs and the heavy thud of tactical boots replaced the soft jazz and clinking champagne glasses. The romantic fairy tale wedding had officially transitioned into a federal crime scene. The elite guests began to back away, clearing a wide path for the federal agents. The whispers escalated into a frantic buzz of shock and disgust. Jason's eyes darted wildly around the room. His fight-or-flight response finally overrode his paralyzed shock. He looked at the approaching federal agents, then at the exits, and pure blind panic took over. He scrambled off his knees, his rented velvet tuxedo now covered in dust and spilled water. He shoved past my mother, who was still frozen on the stage, clutching her chest, and sprinted desperately toward the catering exit on the left side of the room. He ran like the absolute coward he was. He knocked over a towering arrangement of white orchids, the heavy glass vase shattering across the marble floor. He nearly trampled a terrified waiter in his pathetic attempt to escape consequence. But he did not even make it 10 yards. Two federal agents cut off his escape route, tackling him forcefully to the carpeted floor. Jason screamed, struggling uselessly and thrashing his legs against the trained officers. His face slammed into the ground right next to the shattered remains of my mother's champagne glass. He kicked and writhed, but the agents pinned his arms painfully behind his back. The loud, undeniable click of heavy steel handcuffs locking around his wrists echoed through the silent ballroom. He was pinned to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably, begging for mercy from a room full of people who looked at him with nothing but pure absolute disgust. As Jason was tackled, Patricia let out a blood-curdling scream. She reached out her hand toward her golden boy, but her legs gave way. She collapsed onto the stage, entirely unable to stop the federal agents from treating her precious son like the common criminal he was. Richard stood frozen, his mouth hanging open, the illusion of his elite family name completely eradicated. I stood perfectly still, watching the violent capture with clinical detachment. I did not flinch when his face hit the floor. I did not feel a single ounce of pity when the handcuffs clicked tight. He had demanded I mortgage my future to fund this very event. He had tried to discard me. Now I was watching him be discarded by the entire world. The federal agents hauled Jason roughly to his feet. His velvet tuxedo was torn, his hair disheveled, his face smeared with dust and tears. He looked utterly pathetic. As the federal agents hauled Jason roughly to his feet, the harsh reality of his ruined life settled over his tear-streaked face. The lead agent recited his Miranda rights, the words cutting through the heavy silence of the ballroom like a scythe. Jason did not fight anymore. He hung his head, his shoulders shaking with sobs. The elite guests watched his humiliating exit with expressions of pure disgust. His golden future was dead, replaced by the terrifying certainty of a federal prison cell. On the stage, Patricia and Richard finally broke out of their paralyzed state. The delusion they had fiercely protected for decades shattered completely. They watched the federal agents secure their precious golden boy, and panic consumed them. They did not run toward Jason. They knew they had absolutely no power to stop the federal authorities. Instead, their desperate, frantic eyes locked onto the only person in the room who held enough power to save them. They turned to me. My mother scrambled off the elevated platform, her designer gown tangling around her legs. She stumbled, nearly falling onto the marble floor, but caught herself and rushed toward where I stood. My father followed close behind her, his chest heaving, his face slick with terrified sweat. They descended upon me not with the arrogance they had shown in their suburban living room a week ago, but with the frantic, groveling desperation of cornered animals. Patricia crashed to the floor right in front of me. She fell to her knees, her heavy beaded dress pooling around her. She reached out with trembling, manicured hands and grabbed the perfectly creased fabric of my white trousers. Her grip was tight, desperate, as if I were a physical life raft in a violent storm. Tears streamed down her face, ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark, jagged streaks across her cheeks. "Valerie, please!" Patricia wailed, her voice cracking with raw, unfiltered hysteria. "You have to stop them. You have to talk to Mr. Sterling. Tell him it is a misunderstanding. Tell him we can pay the money back. Please, Valerie, they are going to lock your brother in a cage. He will not survive in prison. You have the power to fix this. You have to save him." Richard fell to his knees beside her, abandoning his imposing image. He looked up at me, his eyes wide and pleading. He clasped his hands together in a pathetic gesture of begging. "Valerie, I am begging you," Richard pleaded, his voice breaking. "Talk to your team. Withdraw the evidence. We will do anything you want. We will publicly apologize. We will give you whatever you ask for. Just do not let them take my son away. You control the narrative. Please, you must intervene. I looked down at the two people who had created me. They were kneeling at my feet in front of 500 billionaires, sobbing hysterically, begging me to rescue the very man they had demanded I sacrifice myself for. I did not step back. I did not pull my leg away from my mother's desperate grasp. I simply stood there, an immovable pillar of white silk and absolute authority, staring down at them with eyes as cold as a frozen lake. "We are family," Patricia sobbed, gripping my trousers tighter, trying to pull herself up. "You cannot do this to your own blood. He is your brother Valerie. We are your parents. We love you. We have always loved you. Family forgives. Family protects each other during hard times. Please remember who we are. Do not let vengeance destroy the bond we share. We are family." The sheer, unadulterated hypocrisy of her words hung in the air. She dared to invoke the word family. She dared to weaponize love after spending my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. I looked into her pleading, tear-filled eyes, searching my own soul for even a single drop of pity, a tiny flicker of lingering daughterly affection. I found absolutely zero emotion. The reservoir was entirely dry. I reached down and calmly peeled her trembling fingers off my trousers, breaking her grip with steady, undeniable force. I stepped back, creating a physical boundary they would never cross again. Family. I repeated, my voice devoid of any warmth, carrying easily across the quiet ballroom. "You sold me out for 150 grand, and he tried to use me as a stepping stone for fraud." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, but my fierce, unrelenting gaze silenced her instantly. I stood tall, looking down at the broken remnants of my biological parents. "You did not care about family when you slapped me across the face," I stated. "You did not care about blood when you threw me out of your house to protect a con artist. You wanted me to know my place. You demanded I stay in my lane. Well, this is my lane, and your son just drove his stolen reputation straight into oncoming traffic. This family died the exact moment you threw me out. I am just providing the autopsy report." Richard let out a groan, burying his face in his hands. Patricia slumped forward against the marble floor, sobbing into her arms. Their final manipulation tactic had failed. They had nothing left to bargain with. They had no power, no money, and no boy to hide behind. They were ruined. I did not offer them another glance. I turned my back on my kneeling parents and began walking toward the main exit. At the same moment, the federal agents hauled Jason through the side doors, his pathetic screams echoing faintly before the heavy wooden doors clicked shut behind him. He was gone. I walked down the long, illuminated corridor of the hotel, my heels clicking a steady, victorious rhythm. The air felt lighter. My chest felt entirely unburdened. I walked out into the cool city night, leaving the shattered wreckage of my toxic family behind me forever. 1 full year has passed since I walked out of the Grand Plaza Hotel and finally left my biological family choking on the ashes of their burned-down, pathetic illusions. I did not look back that night, and I certainly have not looked back since. The toxic Chicago air was permanently replaced by the relentless electric energy of New York City. Vanguard Financial Forensics had expanded aggressively, taking over the top 3 floors of a towering glass monolith in the very heart of Manhattan. Justice, when executed with absolute precision, leaves no room for appeals. Jason learned that lesson the hardest way possible. He is currently serving a 96-month sentence in a maximum security federal penitentiary for multiple counts of wire fraud, identity theft, and corporate espionage. There are no custom velvet tuxedos in federal lockup. There are no elite cocktail parties, no luxury yachts, and no gullible billionaires to charm. He traded his rented sports cars and fake watches for a freezing concrete cell and a matching orange jumpsuit. The prosecutors did not even have to work hard for a conviction. The pristine digital evidence my team compiled, combined with his own frantic, highly publicized flight from the wedding reception, sealed his fate before he even set foot in a courtroom. His grand vision of marrying into infinite wealth evaporated the second the heavy iron doors locked behind him. He is a convicted felon, stripped of his stolen prestige, finally forced to exist exactly as he always was. He is a hollow, empty fraud, with absolutely nothing to his name, completely powerless and entirely forgotten. My parents. Patricia and Richard fared no better. They spent their entire lives worshipping at the altar of high society, prioritizing appearances over basic human decency. The universe possesses a remarkable sense of irony, ensuring they lost every single thing they valued. When Jason's offshore gambling debt was exposed, the violent underground syndicate he owed $2 million to did not simply disappear. They came collecting. With Jason behind bars and completely useless, the creditors turned their attention to his enabling parents. To keep their precious golden boy from being targeted in prison, Patricia and Richard had to liquidate everything. Their massive, overly decorated suburban home was seized and sold at a foreclosure auction. They drained whatever pitiful remnants were left in their retirement accounts. They sold the luxury cars, the heavy diamond rings, and the designer gowns my mother loved to flaunt. Today, they live in a notoriously cramped, poorly insulated, and completely decrepit one-bedroom apartment on the very outskirts of the city. The elite social circles they sacrificed me to impress completely blacklisted them. Their former friends stopped returning calls, and their country club memberships were permanently revoked. They are entirely bankrupt, living paycheck to paycheck, suffocating in the very mediocrity they spent their entire lives mocking. They chose to finance a lie, and the true cost of that lie was absolute, irreversible ruin. I sat at my expansive marble desk, the afternoon sun streaming through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my Manhattan office. Sitting directly across from me, looking perfectly at ease, was Marcus Sterling. The logistics billionaire looked as sharp and commanding as he did the night he exposed my brother. We were not discussing family drama or past betrayals. We were conducting serious business. Marcus slid a thick leather-bound contract across the marble surface. It was an exclusive 5-year global retainer agreement. Vanguard Financial Forensics was officially becoming the sole crisis management and risk assessment firm for the entire Sterling International empire. The monetary value of the contract was staggering, cementing my firm as an untouchable titan in the corporate world. I signed the document with a smooth, fluid motion, capping my silver fountain pen. "Vanessa sends her deepest regards," Marcus said, a genuine, warm smile replacing his fierce business demeanor. "She took over our European division last month. She is thriving, Valerie. Your intervention saved her life, and it saved our legacy. I am forever in your debt." I shook his hand firmly, the mutual respect between us forged in the fire of that chaotic night 1 year ago. "You owe me nothing, Mr. Sterling," I replied confidently. "We simply neutralized a bad investment before it could mature." After Marcus left, I walked over to the expansive windows and looked down at the bustling streets of New York. The city was a sprawling maze of ambition, and I stood at the very top of it. I thought about the word failure. It is a weapon insecure people use to keep you trapped in their shadow. My family called me a failure because I refused to shrink myself to fit their toxic, delusional narrative. They demanded I mortgage my future to fund their fake reality. When I refused, they threw me away. But being discarded by toxic people is not a punishment. It is a promotion. Being called a failure by people who have zero integrity was the key to my absolute freedom. They tried to bury me completely unaware that I was a seed. I did not just survive their betrayal. I weaponized it, using their underestimation of me to orchestrate their total downfall. I built an empire on the exact ground they tried to deny me. I am Valerie, and I will always remain the sole architect of my own flawless destiny. Have you ever been labeled a failure or a black sheep by people who were secretly intimidated by your limitless potential? How did you use their underestimation to completely fuel your own massive, undeniable success? Share your incredible stories of ultimate redemption in the comments below. If this epic journey of exposing frauds and claiming your rightful power resonated with you, hit that like button and subscribe to the channel for more stories of ruthless karma and untouchable success. Remember, the absolute best revenge is not just living well, it is watching them realize exactly what they lost forever. Valerie's story powerfully illustrates that being labeled a failure by toxic individuals is never a reflection of your true worth. Instead, it is a manipulation tactic designed to keep you compliant. When we crave validation from those who only seek to exploit us, we surrender our inherent power. This journey teaches us that rejection from an unhealthy environment isn't a punishment, it is an absolute liberation. It grants us the profound freedom to build our own empires surrounded by people who genuinely respect our integrity. Reclaim your narrative today. What toxic expectation will you finally break free from? Please comment below.